Let's move on and talk about the Saudis. Uh, Mohammed bin Salman is the kind of de facto leader there. And for all the outrage that we heard in the early days of the Biden administration, even during the Biden campaign, about how terrible this guy is, murdering Jamal Khashoggi and all that, doesn't seem like we're getting much of a change with U.S. Saudi policy during the Biden administration. And just taking more steps down that path, continuing to support the war in Yemen. I know we got a lot of news here, Connor, so go ahead, just update us what's going on with the Saudis.
Sure. We'll start with so Dave DeCamp has a report at antiwar.com about the Biden administration approves a $650 million missile sale to Saudi Arabia. So let's see. This is from November 4th. So the Pentagon announced that the State Department, this is last week, has approved a potential sale of missiles to Saudi Arabia that they requested. So they're getting 280, or at least the sale has been approved. It's 280 AIM-120C air-to-air missiles and 596 LAU-128 missile rail launchers, as well as they're also getting to go along with this package, spare parts, other support, and logistical services as well. And so those missiles are going to be fit to the Eurofighter Typhoons and American F-15s. And of course, Saudi Arabia is still, the blockade has not been lifted. And they're still bombing the hell out of Yemen currently, especially around Marib, which is really the last city that the Hadi government has any control over in northern Yemen, although the Houthis are closing in on that city and are presumably going to be laying siege to it here pretty soon, or at least that's what it's looking like. And in the meantime, there have just been, extremely high death tolls, usually well over 100 every day. It seems like the last several months, but certainly in the last couple of months. And that city's been contested essentially since February of this year. But anyway, so this is totally contradictory to Biden's original position, which I wrote an article about back in February, where he initially had come out and said that I'm going to end all offensive operations and all relevant arms sales. And so they did temporarily pause sales that were that were made under the Trump administration. They were still pending, I believe, to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And the sale to the UAE was a part of the normalization deal, sort of the phony, stage
Abraham
managed.
Accords.
Yeah, exactly, with the UAE, and they were getting F-35s, Reaper drones, and I think something like 14,000 munitions as well. And so at first it looked like Biden was, as you said, they always make a huge deal out of Khashoggi, which frankly always kind of bugs me because they've killed conservatively. This is an old estimate. An old conservative estimate says that they've already killed a 250,000 people in Yemen. Biden was saying on the campaign trail, I'm going to treat Saudi Arabia like the pariah nation that it is. Or he may have said that about Mohammed bin Salman, but the point is the same. But no, I mean, actually, so it was revealed in late April, I believe it was Alex Ward at Fox who did the reporting where he spoke to Pentagon officials, and it came out that under the Foreign Military Sales Program, America is still servicing Saudi warplanes that are bombing Yemen. And which means under that program, the Saudi Arabia pays the U.S. to provide contractors to maintain their airplanes. And so so that's obviously an offensive operation. In fact, he interviewed John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman back then, who said, he asked him, is this a defensive? Can these, planes be used for defensive and offensive operations? And he said, well, yes, they can be used for both. And then I believe in September, it came out that they were maintaining. We also had another $500 million contract to maintain Saudi helicopters, Apache helicopters, Black Hawk attack helicopters. And so at this point now, this is, the second contract. And just under Biden in this first year, we have, if this goes through, that's over $1 billion in essentially military contracts with Saudi Arabia for the express purpose of, pursuing this almost 7-year-old failed barbaric genocidal war in Yemen, which is of course illegal, and there have been War Powers Act resolutions that were vetoed by Trump. Ro Khanna recently proposed a well, actually they got passed into the House version of the NDAA, but it's being stalled in the Senate, where they are trying to end logistical support and weapons provisions to Saudi Arabia. So hopefully that will go through. But at the same time, this is, I'll have to add as well, this is the primary contractor for this sale is Raytheon, which of course is the former home of Lloyd Austin and also our new Air Force Secretary. But Lloyd Austin, after he left his position as the head of CENTCOM, he retired to the board of Raytheon and then became the War Secretary. So I'll point out here that the State Department, in their PR for this, they're framing it as they're helping Saudi Arabia defend themselves against essentially against Iranian asymmetrical attacks. Basically, conflate the old story of conflating the Houthis with Iran when there's no evidence, and Gareth Porter debunked this stuff years ago, that they're getting weapons through the blockade. And of course, Yemen doesn't really need that. They've been exporting weapons during the war. They're flush with weapons, especially over the many years of the U.S. providing them with weapons back when Saleh was in power, especially. So anyway, the State Department said that let's see. So they pointed to an increase in cross-border attacks against Saudi Arabia in the last year, and these air-to-air missiles are supposed to intercept those attacks. They've called the sale fully consistent with the administration's pledge to lead with diplomacy to end the conflict in Yemen, while ensuring Saudi Arabia has the means to defend itself from Iran-backed Houthi air attacks. And they point to, or the Saudis, as they mention here in this article, have blamed these attacks. Well, they say these attacks have hit their airports and their oil facilities, which, as we know, but it's often framed in the media and by the U.S. as these are Iranian attacks. Some people are saying, sort of interpreting this as the U.S. trying to ease some of the anxiety Saudi may be feeling as U.S. approaches back into nuclear talks with gets back into nuclear talks with Iran. Although I seem to think, based on, we're going to talk about this article from Ted Snyder here in a moment, I think it's possible that this is also about more or less keeping Saudi Arabia in check as they actually tilt toward Iran in so many ways, and also to Russia and China. Because as we've been discussing here on the last couple of episodes we've done, that there really is kind of a sea change going on in the Middle East, where Israel is still trying to get America to possibly fight a war with Iran, or at least stay out of the Iran deal and stay bogged down in the Middle East and never leave Iraq and Syria. But these states like Saudi Arabia, who we assume it was like this, perpetual conflict, Sunni Shia, they'll never work it out. They are actually now really warming ties. They just began, Iran just began or restarted exports to Saudi Arabia. There's even talks about Saudi Arabia and Iran reopening their consulates in each other's respective countries. And some other things as well. There's even reports that have come out that are suggesting that there may even be something set up, a kind of a mechanism where Saudi Arabia would help Iran sell oil and get around the U.S. Sanctions. And there's more to that, but I'll just say that this Ted Snyder piece, he actually interviews Anel Shalin from the Quincy Institute, who has written quite a bit about this recently. And she says that she cites the reasons for this. She says, he says she suggests that Saudi Arabia's moves to reducing tensions with Iran reflects their new despair of the U.S. either prioritizing Saudi preferences or being willing to act as a guarantor of Saudi Arabia's security. And as for the reasons for this, she says, quote, from Obama's signing of the JCPOA to Trump's lack of response after the September 2019 attacks on Saudi oil facilities to Biden pulling out of Afghanistan, the past 3 U.S. administrations have alarmed Saudi rulers. And so he gets into how, starting in 2020, Saudi and Iran began talking because it appeared that Trump was not going to attack Iran and go to war with them. which they would have been happy to, facilitate or help push America into that war. But when it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen, they actually started talking with their longtime rival. In fact, um, famously, General Qasem Soleimani, was on a diplomatic mission to Iraq when he was assassinated at Baghdad International Airport, and he was bringing a response from Iran back to peace overtures made by Saudi Arabia by way of Iraq. And Iraq has been facilitating these talks the whole time. So he talks about how, like I said, they've restarted. Iran has restarted exports to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, has called trade talks between the two cordial. And if the negotiations are successful, Iran is saying there could be a special development in exports to Saudi Arabia. And as I said, they're working out something where basically Iran could sell Saudi Arabia oil at lower prices, basically at lower prices, and then have Saudi Arabia sell. Actually, one second, let me grab the article here so I don't misquote this.
Yeah, and I mean, I do know that there's a lot of people who have put out that Saudi Arabia maybe doesn't have the promised oil reserves that they say they do, or something like that. And so or for whatever reason, have had trouble accessing or processing some of their oil. And so, maybe taking in this Iranian oil gives the Saudis an economic boost as well.
Yeah, it says the Iranians call on the Saudis to help them sell their oil once again. This is an Iraqi, according to This is a report from Middle East Eye where they weren't talking to Iranians or Saudis, but they interviewed some Iraqi officials who are anonymous, but I think it's relevant. Ted cited it in the piece. It says, according to a senior Iraqi official close to Iran and familiar with the progress of the negotiations, quote, they offered to sell it to the Saudis at a price lower than international prices on the condition that the Saudis sell it on the world markets in their own way. He says the article says Iran currently relies mainly on the United Arab Emirates and Oman to sell its oil informally and needs another regional outlet to bypass the U.S. imposed blockade. Saudi appears to be an ideal option for them right now. And I thought it was interesting because this piece is from May, which on the bombshell report from Trita Parsi that came out a few weeks ago about how Biden, during the indirect talks in Vienna, his negotiating team, indirectly talking with the Iranians, made it clear, according to Trita's sources, Iranian and European diplomats, that the Biden administration cannot guarantee that they will stay in the deal, even assuming an initial U.S. return at least and Iranian full compliance with the JCPOA. So it seems like around that same time they were having these talks mediated by the Iraqis where they were going over basically Saudi would like to see them. They mostly were talking about the war in Yemen, and they would like to see sort of a camp tamping down a bit on the axis of resistance factions and what they call incitement against Saudi Arabia from those institutions. And the Iranians said, we'd like to be able to sell oil with you. And also we believe that they were saying that we believe that the Houthis should have a sort of a partnership role with the Yemeni government. They should be partners in governance, is what the sources were saying here in this article. And then the Saudis said that they would like to see greater participation of Sunnis in Iraqi government institutions in a way that better reflects their population in the country, and the end of attacks by Iraqi factions on Saudi allies' potential investments inside Iraq, which I don't know about the second part, but the idea of having the Sunnis getting more representation, that may happen anyway, particularly if Sadr is able to put a government together because he's an Iraqi nationalist and is not as averse to having the Sunnis, playing a role in the government as some of the Shia factions that the Americans empowered in Iraq War II have been. So I'll just say, as far as that arms sale goes, the likelihood of that changing, it seems like there's less than a month of time, and there's a lot of legislation going on right now with Biden's domestic agenda, the NDAA, and the Build Back Better program. So it doesn't appear that that will be able to be thwarted. They would need to get enough votes and then enough of a majority to overcome any kind of a presidential veto. So the prospects for that don't look so great. On the other hand, I was saying that this may be a reason why the Americans are interested in regaining the trust, maybe, of the Saudis. As Ted explains in this piece, um, and as Anel Shalin says, that as China and Russia gain more prominence in the region, Saudi Arabia has an interest in having, and these other states have interest in maintaining good relationships with Iran because they have great, very strong relationships with with Russia and China. So he talks about how they've joined as dialogue partners along with Qatar and Egypt, actually, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Iran has been brought on as a full-fledged member into that group. And what I thought was really interesting, and I'll just quote him here, he says, Saudi Arabia has also made significant moves toward both China and Russia bilaterally. Saudi Arabia's moves toward China are diplomatic and economic. Saudi Arabia has been a priority in China's Middle Eastern diplomacy, according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Yi expressed a willingness to be Saudi Arabia's long-term, reliable, and stable good friend and partner, and strikingly characterized the China-Saudi Arabia relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership. And he says, in a statement that will alarm the U.S., China promised to actively participate in Saudi Arabia's major development projects and further synergize Saudi Arabia into the Belt and Road Initiative. The Saudi foreign minister called China a truly credible strategic partner. And then the last thing is he says that the ties that they're building with Russia are more military. Back in August, Saudi Arabia signed an agreement with Russia to develop joint military cooperation. So all these things are notable, especially, that move toward Russia on the military side. It's interesting because America has recently been pulled, virtually all the missile defenses that America had in Saudi Arabia out, the Patriot missile batteries, for instance. So, it's interesting to see all these sort of overtures between Saudi, and they're sort of moving away from the American-Israeli axis toward a more multipolar situation here as Russia and China become, more involved in the Middle East, and America seems to be tilting more towards Asia for China, I should say, for the Asia pivot.
Now, I will say, and I think I tend to side more with Ted's side on all of this. I've seen two articles in the past couple weeks, one from Middle East Eye, written by somebody from FDD, and then I think another one from like military.com, actually arguing that Saudi Arabia was shifting more towards Israel. And so, while I guess I think it's a possibility that Saudi Arabia, as the U.S. policy develops, will either decide to seek diplomacy with Iran, or will like fall more along the UAE lines and the Abraham Accords and look to get something from the U.S. for normalizing relations with Israel. But all that remains to be seen.